May 5th, 1945, Maeda Escarpment, Okinawa. The ridge is barely visible through the drifting smoke. A thin, jagged silhouette of shattered limestone rises against a gray morning sky, its surface trembling under the thud of Japanese machine gun bursts. Every few seconds, tracers slash through the haze like red-hot needles. The air smells of cordite, wet earth, and blood. American soldiers of the 77th Infantry Division lie pinned just below the plateau, faces pressed into the mud, helmets rattling as rounds tear into the rocks above them. Anyone who tries to move is cut down instantly. Medics are special targets. Anyone upright dies. Yet, a lone figure stands. No rifle, no sidearm. Just a medic's bag swinging at his hip. Desmond T. Doss steps forward into the open, his silhouette exposed against the ridge. Machine guns rip the ground around him, fragments stinging his arms, but he does not stop. Ahead of him, wounded men cry out from the kill zone, trapped between life and a merciless crossfire. Doss exhales once, then runs straight into it. To understand why an unarmed man chose to face the most lethal ridge in the Pacific War alone, we must step back to the world that shaped this moment. In the spring of 1945, the Second World War was entering its final and most violent stage in the Pacific. The island of Okinawa, just 340 miles from mainland Japan, had become the last major stepping stone before a potential invasion of the Japanese home islands. Whoever controlled Okinawa controlled the airfields, the supply corridors, and the strategic high ground that could determine the war's closing chapter. American commanders knew the island would be costly. What they did not know, what no one could fully predict, was just how far Japanese forces were willing to go to defend it. By April 1st, the U.S. 10th Army had landed with more than 180,000 troops, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. But what awaited them inland was not the typical resistance seen on earlier islands. There was no immediate banzai charge, no chaotic clash on the beaches. Instead, Japan had constructed a deadly, deliberate fortress in depth, a network of caves, tunnels, and interlocking kill zones carved into the ridges that cut across central Okinawa. One ridge in particular would become infamous, the Maeda Escarpment, later known to Americans as Hacksaw Ridge. Its steep face rose almost vertically, forcing soldiers to climb nets and ladders under observation from concealed Japanese positions above. Machine guns, mortars, and snipers held every inch of the plateau, and the terrain offered no easy cover. Taking it meant exposing men to a storm of fire from a well-prepared, deeply entrenched force determined to fight to the last man. And into this environment arrived the 77th Infantry Division, including a quiet, thin Virginian named Desmond Thomas Doss. He was unlike anyone around him. Raised in Lynchburg, Virginia, in a devout Seventh-day Adventist family, Doss grew up with a literal interpretation of the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." This belief was not theoretical. It was shaped by the violence he had seen in his own home and by a deep conviction that life was sacred. When war broke out, he didn't avoid service. Instead, he enlisted voluntarily in 1942, insisting that he wanted to serve his country, but without ever carrying a weapon. This made him an anomaly in the U.S. Army. To many in his unit, it made him a problem. During training, Doss faced open hostility. Some men mocked him, others threatened him. A few tried to force him to quit, believing an unarmed man would become a liability in combat. Officers questioned his presence. Some attempted to court-martial him. But military law protected conscientious objectors who still volunteered to serve, and Doss refused every attempt to push him out. He simply wanted to save lives instead of taking them. So he trained as a combat medic, learning to treat gunshot wounds, fractures, blast injuries, and battlefield trauma under pressure. He carried litters, bandages, sulfur powder, morphine, plasma, the tools of someone who would run toward pain rather than away from it. Before Okinawa, Doss had already tasted the Pacific War. He served in Guam and Leyte, where he earned the trust of his men by repeatedly stepping into fire to pull wounded soldiers back to safety. The same men who once mocked him quietly began watching him with respect, realizing that he was the first to move when someone was hit. But Okinawa was different. It was larger, deadlier, and shaped by a level of Japanese defensive engineering the Americans had never seen. The Maeda Escarpment stood like a fortress wall, and the 77th Division knew the cost of assaulting it could be catastrophic. On the night before the attack, soldiers checked their rifles, ammunition, grenades, and bayonets. They mentally prepared for the climb, for the deafening explosions, the claustrophobic tunnels, and the invisible guns waiting above them. Doss prepared differently. He packed bandages, splints, plasma bottles, tourniquets, and his Bible. The only object, other than medical gear, he carried into battle. He would walk into the same gunfire as everyone else, but without the means to shoot back. To many, it seemed unimaginable. To Doss, it was simply the path he had chosen long before the war began. And as the 77th prepared to assault the escarpment, the ridge loomed like a dark, silent warning of what awaited them above. To understand the forces that shaped this deadly battlefield and why it became the site of one of the Pacific War's most extraordinary acts, we must look deeper into Okinawa's strategic landscape and the Japanese defense waiting on the heights. By early May 1945, the Battle of Okinawa had already revealed its brutal nature. Unlike previous campaigns where Japanese forces often counterattacked aggressively, here they had adopted a defensive strategy designed to inflict maximum attrition. Their goal was not to repel the Americans outright, but to bleed them, stall them, and make every yard of advance cost so much that the United States might reconsider invading Japan itself. Nowhere was this strategy more visible than on the Shuri Line, a fortified belt carved across the island's center. The Maeda Escarpment formed one of the most critical strongpoints of this line. The Japanese 24th Division and 44th Independent Mixed Brigade had spent months preparing it, transforming natural ridges into lethal barriers. The top of the escarpment was riddled with interconnected cave systems, reinforced firing chambers, stockpiled ammunition, and hidden entrances masked by rubble and camouflage. Some tunnels stretched for hundreds of feet, allowing Japanese soldiers to appear, fire, and vanish before Americans could identify where the shots were coming from. Mortar tubes were placed deep inside caves, firing from darkened chambers Americans could barely reach even with flamethrowers. Machine gun positions were arranged in carefully overlapping arcs, leaving virtually no dead ground. Any soldier who climbed the escarpment would be exposed to multiple guns firing at once, their rounds crossing over and stitching the ground in patterns designed to kill. The Americans understood the danger. They had already seen how the Japanese fought on Okinawa. Night raids, coordinated counterattacks, booby-trapped approaches, suicide charges inside tunnels, and the terrifying silence of enemy soldiers who rarely surrendered. By the time the 77th Infantry Division reached the Maeda Escarpment, nearly every U.S. unit on the island had taken heavy losses. Yet, the ridge had to be taken. Its plateau controlled the routes toward Shuri Castle, the heart of the Japanese defense, and holding it allowed American forces to break the line open. As the 77th prepared for their assault, they studied maps, photographs, and intelligence reports that all agreed on one thing: the escarpment was built to slaughter attackers. And the men knew it. Soldiers cleaned their weapons in silence. Some wrote letters and tucked them into their pockets. Others stared at the looming cliff,
imagining the climb ahead. Gunfire could be heard at intervals throughout the night, echoing off the rocky face like a constant reminder of what awaited them at dawn. Among them was Desmond Doss. While weapons crews checked their ammunition belts and riflemen inspected their clips, Doss reviewed his medical supplies, bandage rolls, plasma bottles, tourniquets, scissors, antiseptic powder, morphine charrettes. Each item represented a life he hoped to save. He packed them with practiced calm, knowing that within hours these tools would be soaked in blood. He felt the same nerves as everyone else, but his focus was different. While his comrades mentally prepared to kill or be killed, Doss prepared for a battlefield where his only mission was to find the wounded, reach them, and keep them alive. Many soldiers still struggle to understand him. How could a man walk into the same furnace of gunfire without a weapon? How long could an unarmed medic survive on a ridge designed to annihilate attackers? What good was faith against machine guns? And yet, for all their doubts, those who had fought beside him in Guam and Leyte had seen something others hadn't. They had watched him run through shells and bullets, not because he was fearless, but because he refused to let any wounded man die alone. They had seen him crawl into danger without hesitation. They had watched him do the job of two medics when one was not enough. Now, on Okinawa, that commitment would be tested beyond anything the Pacific War had yet to reveal. For the Japanese defenders, the escarpment was their shield. For the Americans, it was an unavoidable gate to the heart of the island. For Desmond Doss, it would become the landscape where an unarmed man performed acts that defied belief.
To understand fully how this moment formed, why this single ridge would showcase one of the Pacific War's most remarkable human stories, we must look at the many angles that defined both the battlefield and the man who walked into it. To understand the magnitude of what Desmond Doss would do on Okinawa, we must first understand the man behind the medic's bag. He was not physically imposing. He stood just over 5.5 feet tall, with a slender build and a quiet way of speaking that often made him seem invisible in a crowded barracks. Yet the men who served beside him quickly learned that beneath this modest exterior was an iron determination shaped long before he set foot on a battlefield. Doss's faith was not rigid or boastful. It was steady, private, and grounded in lived experience. He refused to carry a weapon not out of defiance, but out of a deeply personal conviction rooted in his childhood, one shaped by witnessing the consequences of violence in his own home. The Bible he carried into combat wasn't a symbol. It was a reminder of the principles he refused to abandon, even in war. To his fellow soldiers, this made him difficult to understand at first. Many believed his refusal to carry a rifle put their lives at risk. Some saw him as naive, others as a liability. But during training and the early battles in Guam and Leyte, a transformation occurred. Men noticed that Doss never hesitated when someone was wounded. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't calculate danger. He simply went. He would reach a fallen soldier before the gunfire had fully stopped. He treated wounds under fire with the same calm precision he showed during training. He dragged men to safety until his uniform was soaked in mud and blood. He could not overpower the enemy, but he could outlast fear. By Okinawa, Doss was no longer simply the medic who wouldn't carry a gun. He had become something much more dangerous to lose, a man whose presence meant survival. Hacksaw Ridge was not a battlefield designed for heroics. It was designed for annihilation. The Japanese defensive plan transformed the Maeda Escarpment into a killing ground unlike anything American forces had ever encountered. The cliff face rose sharply, its edges jagged and exposed. Soldiers had to climb cargo nets suspended from the rock, making them perfect targets for machine gun crews waiting above. Once on top, they faced a plateau carved into interlocking fire zones. Japanese soldiers had dug firing holes that appeared and disappeared like openings in a maze. Their machine gun nests were positioned to cross their fire in lethal patterns, ensuring no attacker could find safety by ducking left or right. Mortar teams operated from hidden cave chambers, their tubes recessed deep enough that American counterfire struggled to reach them. Snipers used tiny firing slits drilled through limestone, so narrow that even when Americans located them, they remained nearly impregnable. Every inch of open ground was a mapped-out shooting gallery. For medics, the danger multiplied. Japanese doctrine prioritized targeting medical personnel to weaken American resolve and reduce unit cohesion. The moment a medic was spotted, he became a primary target. The Japanese believed that eliminating the men who saved American lives would accelerate psychological collapse. Under these conditions, climbing the escarpment was an act of sheer will. Surviving it required coordination, covering fire, and the ability to maneuver in a terrain that punished every mistake. Medics were expected to wait for suppressing fire before exposing themselves. DOS, however, operated differently. He moved when someone needed him, not when it was tactically convenient. On a ridge where standing upright for even a second meant inviting death, DOS would rise again and again to reach the wounded. His movements weren't reckless. They were calculated, quick, and purposeful, but they defied the rhythms of conventional battle. While others engaged the enemy, DOS navigated a battlefield where bullets were only part of the danger. He crawled through shattered trees, craters filled with shrapnel, and ground soaked in mud and blood. He followed the faint sounds of men calling for help, their voices nearly drowned out by artillery and the roar of machine guns. In a place where tactics dictated that survival required firepower, DOS survived instead through speed, awareness, and the unwavering commitment to reach those who could no longer move on their own. The Pacific War was brutal. It reshaped moral boundaries for every soldier who stepped onto an island defended by Japanese forces sworn to fight to the last breath. Mercy was rare. Surrender was often rejected. Combat was intimate, close, and unforgiving. In this environment, carrying a weapon felt not only rational, it felt necessary. And yet, DOS refused. His stance isolated him. His principles were questioned. Some soldiers thought he was hiding behind faith. Others believed he would crack under the pressure of real combat. But the truth was more complex. DOS did not judge others for carrying weapons. He did not preach. He did not expect to be treated differently. He simply carried his convictions with the same steadiness he carried his medical gear. War forces men to make decisions that blur moral lines. DOS chose to hold his line firmly, not because he wanted to be different, but because he couldn't live with himself otherwise. His courage was not the absence of fear. It was the refusal to abandon what he believed was right. On Okinawa, where every day confronted soldiers with choices between survival and humanity, DOS became a reminder of something rare, a man who could step into hell without surrendering the core of who he was. As the 77th Infantry rose before dawn to climb the escarpment, their weapons ready, their nerves tightened by the knowledge of what awaited them, DOS prepared too. But his battlefield would be defined not by the enemies he faced, but by the lives he would fight to save. Leadership on Okinawa was tested in ways few American officers had ever experienced. Commanders were responsible not only for pushing their men up the escarpment, but for maintaining morale as they advanced into terrain where every inch was paid for with blood. Officers knew that to hesitate meant to stall the entire line, yet they also knew that pushing too fast meant exposing their men to slaughter. Within this tension, Desmond DOS became an unexpected anchor. Most leaders relied on firepower, strategy, and discipline, but the presence of an unarmed medic who repeatedly entered kill zones altered how commanders viewed courage. Officers who had once questioned his place in the unit now recognized that DOS was more than a medic. He was a stabilizing force. His actions reassured men during moments when leadership struggled to maintain cohesion. In Okinawa's chaos, muddy slopes, collapsing tunnels, ruptured communication lines, and the constant roar of artillery, steady leadership was critical. The 77th Infantry's officers coordinated assaults under fire, repositioned squads to avoid exposed ground, and made split-second decisions that determined survival. Yet they observed something startling. When DOS moved forward, soldiers often followed, not toward the enemy, but toward their wounded brothers. His presence amplified morale in a way that no battlefield order could. Men believed that if they fell, DOS would come for them. That knowledge kept units from fracturing. It maintained the will to hold ground even when Japanese counterattacks threatened to push them off the escarpment. Officers saw that morale was not only shaped by strength, but also by trust, and DOS became one of the most trusted figures on the ridge. To appreciate what DOS faced, we must consider the men firing at him. Japanese forces defending the Shuri Line were among the most experienced in the Imperial Army. Many had fought in China, in earlier island campaigns, or had trained for years in anticipation of an American assault. They were dug into a defensive system engineered with mathematical precision. Every position had a purpose, every field of fire had been rehearsed. These soldiers saw medics differently than Western forces did. In American doctrine, medics were protected when possible, and striking them was discouraged. But Japanese battlefield strategy adhered to total war principles. A medic removing wounded soldiers meant the Americans would sustain strength for future assaults. Therefore, medics were not just legitimate targets, they were priority targets. From the Japanese perspective, the figure of a man running upright without a weapon into the hail of fire created a mixture of confusion and opportunity. They aimed at him with the intention of breaking American resolve. Yet DOS's ability to move through these kill zones frustrated their expectations. He shifted quickly, used terrain as cover, and often appeared where Japanese gunners did not expect movement. Their firing positions were meticulous, crossfires covering open ground, tunnels allowing for rapid shifts between firing ports, and snipers given full freedom to choose high-value targets. Each time DOS moved, he risked drawing a sniper's round or machine gun burst intended specifically to end his efforts. Understanding the enemy's perspective highlights the severity of the threat he faced. He was not simply running through random gunfire, he was running through intentionally concentrated fire designed to stop medics first. Combat on Okinawa was not only a physical struggle, it was a psychological crucible that tested every soldier's breaking point. Weeks of rain, rotting vegetation, and endless artillery wore down even the most seasoned fighters. Sleep was scarce, nutrition was inconsistent, the constant smell of death hung over the escarpment. On this terrain, fear behaved differently. For riflemen, fear came from exposing themselves to enemy fire. For machine gun crews, it came from knowing their positions could be targeted by flamethrowers or grenades. For medics, the fear was more nuanced. They felt the danger not only for themselves, but for every man calling for help. DOS functioned in this environment with a psychological resilience that baffled some of his comrades. He acknowledged fear, but he refused to let it dictate his actions. His calm demeanor under fire steadied the men around him. They watched him tie tourniquets with hands that did not shake, even as bullets struck the ground inches away. But DOS was not immune to the mental strain. He felt the weight of every cry he could not reach, every life slipping away before his hands could find them. Yet instead of slowing him down, these moments intensified his resolve. Psychologically, he operated on a different compass. His measure of success was not ground gained, but lives saved. This mindset gave him a rare form of battlefield endurance. As the fighting grew more intense, most soldiers' world shrank to the few feet in front of them. Doss's world expanded. Every cry, every shadow of movement, every wounded silhouette became his mission. This psychological perspective would define everything he did once the 77th Infantry reached the top of the escarpment. And it was there, on that plateau torn by machine guns and shrapnel, where Doss's greatest trial awaited him. The ridge turns red. The top of Okinawa's Maeda escarpment, late afternoon. A harsh ocean wind sweeps across the plateau, carrying with it the metallic sting of gunpowder. The sun hangs low, casting long, fractured shadows over the jagged terrain. The calm lasts only seconds, because nothing on this ridge stays quiet for long. Desmond Doss and the remaining men of the unit inch forward, boots sinking into mud soaked with rain and blood. The Japanese defenders, hidden in fortified tunnels and interlocked firing positions, have been waiting. The first crack of a rifle slices the air. Then another. Then an eruption. A coordinated Japanese counterattack slams into the Americans with violent precision. Grenades arcing from unseen trenches, machine guns spitting fire from pillbox slits barely wider than a fist. The ground explodes in plumes of dust and flame, knocking men off their feet. Doss doesn't duck for safety. He moves toward the sound of the screams. Through drifting smoke, he spots two soldiers thrown by a blast, one clutching his leg twisted at an impossible angle, the other gasping as blood pours through his fingers. Doss drops beside them, hand steady, despite the chaos thundering around him. "You're all right. Stay with me," he whispers, not as reassurance, but as a promise. A burst of fire gun tears into the earth inches from his knee. Doss doesn't flinch. He wraps a tourniquet, presses gauze into a cavity wound, and lifts the injured man onto his back and begins the slow crawl toward the cliff's edge. Each inch gained under fire, each second borrowed from death. Behind him, more explosions detonate, shrapnel slicing through smoke clouds like razor fragments. The Americans can't advance, can't retreat, can't even lift their heads. But Doss stands, alone, in the open. He waves desperately for a stretcher crew that never comes. Most are already wounded or dead. So he improvises, dragging bodies by their belts, rolling them onto makeshift litters of loose canvas, pushing their weight across mud while bullets stitch the ground around him. The Japanese gunners, realizing the medic refuses to die, redirect their fire, a chilling respect for an enemy who refuses to carry a weapon yet refuses to fall. And still, Doss moves. One soldier, then another. Then another. Every time he returns to the carnage, the ridge grows louder, darker, more impossible. But he repeats the same prayer with each step back into hell. "Lord, help me get one more." The night begins to creep over the battlefield, and with it, the moment that will turn Doss from a medic into a legend. Into the mouth of the cave. Night settles over the escarpment like a shroud. The wind quiets, but the battlefield does not. The darkness crawls with movement, the shuffling of wounded men, the echo of distant mortar fire, the unsettling whisper of Japanese soldiers repositioning in their underground labyrinth. The Americans who survived the initial assault have pulled back to the lip of the ridge, bruised, bleeding, and convinced the plateau is lost. But one man remains on top, not with a rifle, not with grenades, just a medic bag hanging off his shoulder and a faith that refuses to shatter. Desmond T, illuminated only by the glow of distant fires, creeps toward the black opening of a reinforced Japanese cave. He heard someone scream from this direction minutes earlier. He doesn't know if it was an American or a Japanese soldier. He goes anyway. The cave entrance is a charred oval in the earth, ringed with splintered roots and the sharp smell of burning canvas. Das pauses only long enough to rip a strip from his own shirt, soak it with water from his canteen, and tie it around his mouth to keep out the smoke. Then, he slips inside. The darkness swallows him immediately. The ground is uneven, a mixture of loose soil, broken bamboo supports, and pools of blood that glisten faintly in what little light seeps through the entrance. The deeper he moves, the tighter the tunnel becomes, forcing him to crouch, then crawl. A sudden metallic clatter echoes behind him. Das freezes. A Japanese soldier has stumbled through a side passage, clutching his stomach where shrapnel protrudes like twisted metal teeth. The man collapses before noticing Das. Das stares for a moment, then crawls toward the enemy. He presses a bandage against the man's wound, tightens it, and leaves a small canteen of water by his side. He saves him, then keeps going. Minutes later, Das finds the source of the scream. An American soldier lies pinned under a shattered beam, one arm mangled and half buried in rubble. His breathing is shallow, desperate. When he sees Das, tears fill his dirt-caked eyes. "You came back. I thought everyone was gone." Das braces himself, digs with both hands, ignoring the splinters slicing into his fingers. He lifts, pulls, drags, and finally frees the trapped man. The soldier cries out as the movement sends white-hot pain through his body. Das works quickly. Splint, pressure bandage, morphine, whispered reassurance. Then the problem hits him. The soldier is unconscious, too heavy to carry through the tunnel. So Das lays on his back, positions the man over his chest, wraps his arms around him like a human cradle, and begins the agonizing crawl backward. Through the cave, through the smoke, through the suffocating dark. Outside, machine gun fire rips across the ridge again. The Japanese have launched a second nighttime attack. But Das doesn't stop. He pulls the wounded man inch by inch toward the cliff's edge, toward the ropes he's already secured, toward the chance of a life saved. Another explosion rocks the earth, knocking Das sideways and sending debris raining over his head. Still, he whispers through clenched teeth, "Just one more." The ridge that refused to let go. Das reaches the cliff's edge just as another mortar round slams into the plateau, spraying the night with sparks and shredded earth. The ground trembles beneath him, his ears ring, his vision blurs. But the weight in his arms, a wounded soldier barely clinging to life, anchors him to a single purpose. The ropes he secured earlier sway slightly in the wind. They are slick with dust and blood. Das hooks the soldier into the makeshift sling he fashioned from scraps of cargo netting, tightens each knot, then braces both feet against the rock as he lowers him inch by inch toward the darkness below. The rope burns his palms raw. His arms shake. His breath breaks into short, ragged bursts. But the soldier descends safely, vanishing into the shadows where the medics below lift him in disbelief. Das whispers again, "Lord, help me get one more." Then he turns around and runs straight back into the gunfire. The Japanese now push deeper across the ridge, emboldened by the fading American presence. Their footsteps echo across the plateau, silent, fast, disciplined. Bayonets glint in the firelight. Voices drift in short-clipped commands. They know the terrain, every tunnel and trench. This is their fortress. And Das is alone in their killing field. A wounded corporal lies only 30 yards from the nearest Japanese foxhole. 3 other medics had tried to reach him earlier. Each was driven back by rifle fire. The corporal has been bleeding for hours. His uniform is soaked, his breathing shallow, his hope almost gone. Das drops to his stomach, hugging the earth as bullets crack overhead. He crawls through mud, across splintered wood, past the bodies of Marines who never made it off the ridge.
Every sound, every breath could expose him. A rifle shot tears through the dirt inches from his hand. Another snaps a branch above his head. Doss keeps crawling. The corporal sees a silhouette approaching and tries to raise his arm, but the effort sends him into a coughing fit. Doss reaches him, presses a hand gently to his shoulder, and whispers for him to stay calm. He works with impossible speed, gauze, field dressing, morphine, all done under direct fire. Then the problem hits him. The soldier is unconscious, too heavy to carry through the tunnel. So Doss lays on his back, positions the man over his chest, wraps his arms around him like a human cradle, and begins the agonizing crawl backward. Through the cave, through the smoke, through the suffocating dark. Outside, machine gun fire rips across the ridge again. The Japanese have launched a second nighttime attack. But Doss doesn't stop. He pulls the wounded man inch by inch toward the cliff's edge, toward the ropes he's already secured, toward the chance of a life saved. Another explosion rocks the earth, knocking Doss sideways and sending debris raining over his head. Still, he whispers through clenched teeth, "Just one more." The night that watched him stand alone. The wind shifts, pushing smoke across the plateau and thick rolling waves. It blurs edges, hides shapes, bends sound into hollow echoes. The ridge feels alive, breathing, groaning, swallowing light, as if the island itself wants the battle to continue. Somewhere in that shifting darkness, Doss moves with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who has long passed the limits of exhaustion. His uniform hangs in shredded strips, his boots are soaked with blood, some his, mostly not. His medic pouch is almost empty, but the ridge is not empty. Not yet. Machine gun bursts shred the air again, forcing him to drop behind the remains of a blown-out tree trunk. The bark is slick with rain and soot. Far ahead, a Marine cries out, a broken, desperate sound that cuts through everything else. Doss rises. He sprints across open ground where Japanese rifles have direct sight. He doesn't zigzag. He doesn't hesitate. He runs straight, trusting speed, darkness, and the chaos of battle to shield him. Tracer rounds streak past, slicing orange arcs through the smoke. One catches his pat leg, tearing the fabric. Another snaps against a rock behind him. He drops beside the wounded Marine, a young private with a leg wound so severe the bone is exposed. The private tries to crawl away from the gunfire, but his strength fails. When he sees Doss kneel beside him, his shoulders collapse with relief. Doss wraps the leg quickly, applies a tourniquet, then lifts the Marine in a fireman's carry. The ridge blurs around them as he pushes toward the cliff. Halfway there, a Japanese soldier emerges from a foxhole, bayonet raised. Doss freezes. The soldier hesitates, confused at the sight of an unarmed American carrying a man rather than fighting. For a suspended heartbeat, they stare at each other through drifting smoke. Then the Japanese soldier lowers his weapon and slips back into the trench. Doss keeps moving. He reaches the ropes once more, secures the Marine, and begins lowering him. His muscles burn like they're tearing from the bone. His grip fails twice, but he catches the rope again with raw palms. Below, the medics shout up through cupped hands, "Doss, that's the 11th!" Doss doesn't respond. He doesn't stop. He turns his whole body back toward the battlefield. The ridge erupts again. Japanese troops launch a coordinated sweep, firing in arcs meant to clean out the last pockets of resistance. The plateau becomes a maze of muzzle flashes and dark figures moving fast. Most men would retreat. Most would hide. Most would accept that enough had been done. Doss refuses. He crawls now, staying low, following the faint moans that guide him through the smoke. He finds a sergeant with shrapnel embedded in his neck. He finds a runner curled behind a stone outcrop, bleeding from both arms. He finds a Marine whose helmet took a bullet that knocked him senseless. One by one, Doss drags them to the edge. One by one, he lowers them down.
One by one, he whispers the same line under his breath, not as a request now, but as a promise. One more. Keep me going for one more. Hours blur. Pain dulls. The night rages on. At one point, a Japanese search team passes within feet of him. Their boots crunch over broken stone. A flashlight beam cuts across his back as he lies motionless behind a fallen log, protecting an unconscious Marine beneath him. The beam lingers, then moves on. Only when the patrol disappears into a tunnel entrance does Doss resume dragging the Marine toward the ropes. Below, American commanders begin to notice something unbelievable. Every few minutes, another wounded man descends from the sky, lowered by a single rope, always by the same unseen hands. By the time the first streaks of morning light touch the ridge, Doss has been rescuing men for nearly 12 hours without pause. His hands barely function. His legs tremble uncontrollably. His vision fades in and out. But when he hears another muffled groan in the far corner of the plateau, where flames still burn and Japanese troops still circle, he forces himself to stand, because the ridge still holds one more man, and Desmond Doss is not leaving without him. The sun reveals what the night kept hidden. Dawn rises slowly over Okinawa, pulling a pale gray light across the shattered plateau. Smoke hangs in the air like a low ceiling, drifting between broken trees, crater lips, and the twisted metal of abandoned equipment. The ridge that had roared all night now lies eerily quiet, as though the island itself is taking its first breath after suffocating in violence. Down below, medics and officers stand gathered around the base of the escarpment, staring upward with expressions that teeter between disbelief and awe. They've spent the entire night receiving wounded men one by one, each lowered with the same torn rope, each telling the same impossible truth. Doss saved me. They counted at first, then they stopped counting. The number felt unreal. Some came down conscious, whispering how he dragged them through fire. Some arrived unconscious, bearing fresh bandages and makeshift tourniquets only one medic on that ridge knew how to tie. Some were missing weapons, helmets, or boots, because Doss had removed anything that added weight. The rope swayed again.
Another Marine appeared, descending in the soft morning light. His face was pale, but his breathing steady. The medics below caught him, laid him gently on a stretcher, and stared up once more, waiting, watching for the silhouette they still couldn't believe existed. A sergeant stepped forward, then a lieutenant, then the battalion commander. All three stood motionless, eyes fixed on the top of the cliff, because they knew what this meant. If another wounded man was coming down, Doss was still up there. And he had been up there, alone. Now the sun's full light reaches the plateau, spilling across the dirt in wide golden beams. Shapes once swallowed in darkness become clear. Bodies, debris, twisted weapons, everything stands in stark detail. And then they see him. A small figure moving across the ridge with slow, uneven steps. His posture slants left, as if one leg can barely support him. His uniform is nearly colorless from blood and dust. His helmet is cracked at the rim. His medic pouch hangs empty. Desmond Doss walks with the heavy sway of a man whose body is finished, but whose will is not. Beside him, leaning heavily on his shoulder, is another wounded Marine. Voices rise from below. Shouts, cheers, calls of encouragement, but Doss doesn't react. He doesn't even look down. His focus stays fixed on the ropes and on the man he's supporting. When he reaches the edge, he gently eases the Marine into the sling, double-checks every knot with trembling fingers, then lowers him down hand over hand. His palms are raw, split open, soaked crimson, but he holds the rope with the grip of someone who no longer feels pain in any normal way. The medics catch the Marine, shout, "Secured," upward. But Doss doesn't hear them. The moment the rope goes slack, his body drops to his knees. He kneels there, head bowed, hands limp, chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths, and for the first time in 12 hours, he stops moving. Not because he chooses to, but because he simply has nothing left. 2 Marines scale the rope to reach him. When they touch the top, they find Doss on his side, barely conscious, whispering something they can hardly make out. One leans closer. Doss isn't asking for water. He isn't asking for help. He isn't asking for anything for himself. He is asking if anyone else might still be alive. The Marines can't answer. They've walked the plateau. They've checked the craters and trenches, and what they know hits them with the weight of a truth they themselves struggle to believe. Every living American left on the ridge was already sent down by Desmond Doss. They lift him gently, securing him to the rope, and lower him with the same care he showed every man he touched. When he reaches the bottom, the battalion gathers around. These are men who had mocked him, doubted him, dismissed him as naive or soft. Men who once thought required a rifle in the hands of every participant. Now they part for him, silently, as one of their own carries him toward the aid station. Some bow their heads, some wipe their faces, some stare at him as if seeing him for the first time. The ridge behind them still smolders. Bodies still lie scattered across the earth. But the number of men walking away, alive, defies logic. And as word spreads through the regiment, a single question forms in every mind. How many did he save? 10? 20? 50? More? The truth will only become clear later. But one thing is already certain. The battle for Hacksaw Ridge had turned into something else entirely. A night where one unarmed medic accomplished what entire platoons could not, and forced hardened soldiers to rewrite their understanding of courage. The numbers, the reports, the legend. By the time official counts were conducted, Desmond Doss had personally rescued 75 men from the Maida escarpment in a single night. 75 soldiers who otherwise would have been left behind, lost to the chaos of gunfire, artillery, and the treacherous cliffs. Some were lowered multiple times from different points of the ridge. Others were dragged across exposed terrain to relative safety. Each rescue carried a risk measured in seconds, and Doss refused to stop until the last man was accounted for.
Commanders were stunned. Colonel Mills, overseeing the 77th Infantry, wrote in his report, "Private Doss's actions went beyond the limits of duty or reason. He repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to save the lives of others. Without a single weapon, he climbed and descended that ridge, while the rest of us would have considered it certain death." His Medal of Honor citation would later describe the acts as indescribable courage, emphasizing that his heroism was not fueled by combat, but by a steadfast dedication to saving life, even in a place designed to guarantee death. Soldiers who witnessed the night speak in hushed, reverent tones about what they saw. Private Alvin Yorkson, not to be confused with the World War I hero, recalled, "I've seen men fight, I've seen men die, but I have never seen anything like Doss. He didn't just move, he carried hope. Each time he came back up that ridge, it felt like someone lit a fire in all of us." The psychological impact on both sides of the battle was profound. American soldiers gained a renewed will to hold ground, knowing that their medic would risk everything to retrieve them. Meanwhile, Japanese defenders reported seeing a ghost in the smoke, a single figure moving through impossible odds, someone they could not predict, could not stop, and who seemed to mock the very concept of fear. The ridge itself became a symbol.
Hacksaw Ridge was no longer just a terrain obstacle. It became a testament to what courage and conviction could achieve in the face of insurmountable odds. News of Doss's actions spread through the ranks, transforming his once skeptical comrades into unwavering believers in his abilities and character. Official military reports noted additional points. Wounded Americans rescued, 75. Time spent actively rescuing, 12 hours. Number of times Doss climbed and descended ridge under fire, multiple, estimated 20 plus. Enemy fire encountered. Machine guns, rifles, grenades, mortars, and sniper positions. Doss himself said little. When interviewed later, he did not speak of heroism, medals, or praise. His focus remained on the men, the ones who survived and the ones who did not. He carried no trophies, no flags, no weapons, only the memory of each life he touched and the faith that guided him. By the end of the Okinawa campaign, Doss's actions became legendary within the U.S. Army and beyond. The award of the Medal of Honor decades later was not simply recognition of bravery under fire. It was recognition of the extraordinary moral courage required to save lives in a world determined to take them. The ridge, scarred and smoking, would endure in history as a monument not of stone, but of humanity. A place where one man, armed only with conviction, reshaped the meaning of heroism. Courage without a weapon. Desmond Doss's story does not end with medals or accolades. It ends with a quiet, enduring lesson about the power of conviction and the strength of the human spirit. In the chaos of Okinawa, a battlefield designed for death, one man proved that courage could exist without a rifle, that bravery could be measured in the lives saved rather than the lives taken. Hacksaw Ridge remains etched into history, not merely as a strategic location, but as a stage for extraordinary moral courage. Doss's actions challenge our understanding of what it means to be heroic. The world often associates heroism with destruction, with force and firepower. But Doss reminds us that true valor sometimes comes from restraint, compassion, and an unwavering dedication to life itself. His story also reflects a deeper truth about war. Even in humanity's darkest moments, there are glimmers of selflessness that shine brighter than any weapon. Soldiers around him, inspired by his resolve, carried on not only because of orders, but because of hope. Hope embodied in a single man who refused to harm, yet could not be stopped from saving. In the decades since Okinawa, Doss's legacy has become timeless. He is remembered not only in the medal that bears his name, but in the countless lives his example has inspired. People who choose principle over expediency, courage over fear, and humanity over destruction. The ridge still stands. Time will wear its scars, but the echo of a medic who ran unarmed through machine gun fire endures. It whispers a lesson that transcends war. True heroism is not in the fight you wage against others, but in the lives you choose to protect, even when the world tells you it is impossible. And in that quiet truth, Desmond Doss remains immortal. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and hit the bell to uncover more tales of courage, sacrifice, and the extraordinary heroes history almost forgot. Share your thoughts in the comments. Who inspires you to stand unarmed in the face of impossible odds?